Hi, welcome everyone to Cara's Symposium. This is Cultural Event 2. I'm Jen Baird. I'm a professor of archaeology at Birkbeck College, which is part of the University of London. And I've been working with Cara for a few years now, supporting their Syria program. I'm really happy to be here with you this evening with my colleague, Dr. Kristen from the University of Durham, to showcase some really important work that's been happening with academics that are part of Cara. First of all, I want to remind everyone that full versions of each of our speakers' presentations are available in both Arabic and English to watch anytime if you just click on the on-demand part of the platform. So if you haven't already seen these, I'd encourage you to watch them, as they're all really compelling examples of the important work that Syrian colleagues are undertaking in archaeology, community, heritage, and memory. Since the start of the Syrian conflict a decade ago, much of the work on Syrian cultural heritage has been remote. There's been a lot of hand-wringing over sites which were assessed from a distance as being damaged. There's been a lot of work on the destructive spectacle created by ISIS at Palmyra and a lot of positioning of Syria's heritage as a global one. But what the incredible work we'll hear about today shows is that careful research on the ground gives a much more complicated and nuanced picture of what's happening before the conflict, during the conflict, and since into the future, and a lot of detail, as we'll hear tonight, on the importance of local communities, local society, local economies for understanding what's going on. Kristen.
Thanks, Jen. So indeed, the research that's being accomplished by our Syrian colleagues is providing new insights, it's generating new data, and it's enhancing our understanding of cultural heritage in Syria. And collaborations with these researchers is really a crucial step in documenting, understanding, and ultimately protecting tangible and intangible cultural heritage in Syria. So collaborations between Syrian researchers, international teams will allow us to bring together data from multiple scales, remote and on the ground, and explore the use of new technologies and better understand these complex local dynamics. This work is really essential. So now we are going to introduce our speakers and ask them to give us a short 5-minute summary of their pre-recorded presentations that we hope you've already been able to view. Jen?
Yeah, and so it's my great pleasure to introduce first my friend and colleague, Adnan Almohamad. Adnan, luckily for both Kristen and myself, actually, he's an honorary research fellow at Birkbeck, as well as being an honorary research fellow in the Department of Archaeology at Durham. From 2009 to 2014, Adnan worked in the Department of Excavation and Archaeological Studies in the DGIM, the General Directorate of Antiquities and Museums in Syria. During the same period, he was a lecturer in ancient ceramics at the University of Aleppo. His research interests are located in the Upper Syrian Euphrates and in the destruction and preservation of Syrian cultural heritage. His current work focuses on documenting the looting and destruction of archaeological sites in North Syria and on the relationships between cultural heritage and local Syrian communities. And in this first presentation he's going to give us this evening, he's going to talk about his work at Shash Hamdan. Adnan, over to you. Whoops, worked really well 2 seconds ago. Adnan, are you there? Yeah, sure. We can skip to one of the other presentations first if we need to. Yeah, sure. I guess that brings us to Hassan. Yeah, Kristen, did you want to go ahead and introduce?
No problem. Yeah, for sure. So I guess our first speaker then is going to be Hassan Almohamad, who I've had the pleasure of meeting this evening. He completed his master's at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris, specializing in the theory and practice of language and fine art. He completed his PhD in 2009 at the University d'Auvergne in France. He was a professor in the French department at Aleppo University, where he taught courses on literary text analysis. He's interested in visual culture, such as documentaries and photographic art, and in cultural studies of the Middle East and the Arab world. And he's also passionate about media and communications, eco-criticism, French and Francophone studies. And tonight he's going to talk to us about his fascinating research on graffiti. So please, Hassan.
Thank you so much, Kristen and Jen. Just give me a second to share my presentation. Can you see my presentation? Okay. So the title of my presentation is simple. It's Graffiti in Raqqa, Social and Political Memory. So why this research? Actually, after the Syrian uprising in the context of Arab Spring, there was like a growth of artists, and especially graffiti in Raqqa. So since 2011, there was, visual studies about this theme. So I decided to study the impact of this social and political graffiti in the city of Raqqa. And here is the outline of my presentation. So in my in the first part, I introduced the landscape of the graffiti in the 21st century. So I evoked the impact, the historical impact of the graffiti through different Western country, and very symbolic and iconic graffiti, like in Paris during the Algerian War, and before that. I also evoked some graffiti in Ireland, and of course, famous graffiti in Berlin during the liberation. War, the liberation of Berlin, and the Nazi graffiti there. But we have in Syria also very famous graffiti. So it's going to be the second part of my presentation. And I think many people know this graffiti, which is It's Your Turn, Doctor. So that was about the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And this graffiti has been made by Syrian children in the city of Daraa. I will talk thoroughly about the visual construction of this memory in Raqqa. So why I consider the visual and the graffiti work as a memory for this city. And finally, I will mention the context in which there was production, massive production of this graffiti in the city of Raqqa. So here's the city of Raqqa. So this is the little thing in red. As you can see, well, we have Turkey in the north, in the Iraq on the west, and Lebanon west, and Jordan, Amman, just in the bottom. So it's a small city, but as we know, there was this growth of graffiti in Raqqa, especially after the liberation of Raqqa from ISIS at that time. And I will mention three types of graffiti later. But now, in this part, I used actually after underlying the importance of graffiti in the 21st century, as I mentioned before, and before that, and after in the modern age in Syria, I'm trying to present this graffiti in Raqqa as a form of communication, not as an artwork, actually, because it was really a communication tool between different categories of people, between soldiers, artists, activists, and other. So This is the first and the first faithful graffiti. It's your turn, doctor. So we mean here by doctor, the Syrian president, as I mentioned before. So this is a capture from Google. I took in August 2020. So we have different reproduction of this famous graffiti. And which was the spark of the Syrian revolution at this time. So while studying this, the existence of this graffiti in Raqqa, I discovered three types of graffiti. So the first one I called neutral, means individual graffiti. So, and this is the most common graffiti in the city of Raqqa, because many people, use different, structure or walls to just leave their names on walls, and so they don't belong to a political or a social group. Actually, they just mark a territory or a souvenir. While the first one, it's more important because it gives a historical dimension. So I mean the military graffiti, as I will show some picture, and it allows us to define the precise period of the existence of this military factions in Raqqa. We have also the political graffiti with the social graffiti, as we will see later. So, and after that, I will expand a little bit in my presentation about the social political graffiti under, in the post-ISIS era, especially under ISIS, so in Syrian Democratic Forces, we noticed there was a transformation of this graffiti. And for instance, before the control of Raqqa by Syrian Democratic Forces, the graffiti would have been normal without any color, or they're usually drawn with black color and with not structure words and writing. While here we will see more colors in this graffiti and more themes and topics, more different topics. So as we will see, this graffiti reflects hope in education, environment, or solidarity themes. So here we have an example of this, what I call the neutral graffiti. As you can see, as I said, they're written in black color, and they're not organized actually, because people, they just tag or draw this graffiti quickly and with the very basic material. They don't have sophisticated material as like modern artists. And so the first one on the left, it's written "Love is not everything," and we have the name of Khalid here. Good hearts might suffer or be offended, but they don't know hate. So this graffiti were, I had to mention that, this is photographs of graffiti, and they've been taken in 2019 and between 2019 and 2020. While the first example, it translates the military extent of some groups here, because we have the signature just below the graffiti. So we can read on this wall. And by the way, this is a school wall. Usually, different, activists or taggers use school walls to write, on this wall. So It's written, we really miss thy people. No, I will not forget you, Suhail. So Suhail is a name of a guy. Peace upon those who breathe. Sorry. So this is a second example about the solidarity between Syrian cities. So as you can see, I mean, the translation on the first, I mean, on the left picture here, the graffiti, Raqqa huna Idlib. So here is Raqqa, this is Idlib. So this graffiti was drawn on the government palace wall in Raqqa in May 2020. And we have the same example, but this time on a destroyed building. As you can see here, the destroyed facade with this graffiti. Well, it's a bit, it's a small, but it's written in red, and it's written the same thing here. So this reflects the moment when Idlib has been bombarded by Russian military at this time. So we have another sample, I'm sorry. So these examples are taken under the Syrian Democratic Forces. As you can see on the left one, we have like a property project about the environment. So that explains why we have, you know, a color and new themes here with the trees and the sun and beautiful colors. While on the right, we have, this time it's a mural. And I think one of the finding, when the country is stable, we can product more, very interesting art, and even in terms of size. So this is a huge mural on the wall, representing a man, a Bedouin man with a woman and a little girl from Raqqa. And this, clothing really reflects the traditional, way these people wear clothing. So, so that was just quick presentation that led me to this short conclusion also. Through this presentation, the graffiti images or photograph here in the city of Raqqa are also an act of witnessing, which are embodied in different visual, stuff and materials. And to me, they're used as a historical, document and evidence for the city to construct and reconstruct the memory of the city. So this graffiti, they're considered as a document and proof also of this construction, and somehow a truthful social and political memory in Raqqa. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hassan. I have so many questions for you, but I'm going to keep a hold of myself and keep to our schedule, which is first we're going to have all the presentations and then we'll come back to some questions. But thanks again so much for that. So we're going to try again now to go back to Adnan Almohamad, who I introduced a bit earlier. Have we got Adnan now?
عدنان.
And you're moving this time now. This is great.
أنت تتحرك، الفيديو شغال هالمرة، جيد.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Peace be upon you all.
Hello everyone, thank you for attending. Thank you to Cara and to all the organizers. Today, I will talk about the destruction of cultural heritage in Syria, the case of Shash Hamdan Tomb in the Upper Euphrates area. And I'll talk about what happened to this location between 1995 and 2020. This research was conducted under the mentorship of Dr. Baird from Baird University. In fact, if we are to talk about this destruction and the extent of destruction that was inflicted on this location, then let me note that this research, in fact, is different and clearly distinct from similar locations, research that talks about the destruction of archaeological locations, because here the focus is on the role of local community and how they've been involved in the protection of the site before the war and after. And this is the map of Syria, and this location here is where the archaeological site we're talking about is located. This is a blueprint or the plan of Shash Hamdan. It goes back to the late 2nd and early 3rd century GC. Here is a comparison in order to show the damages. You can see some of the rebels. It indicates that there has been digging activities, and it started in 1995 and in 1996. Those digging activities were conducted by regime-affiliated groups. In the second photo, the photo to the right, we can see further damage because of the digging activities. Here are a sequence of photos of the same location in 1996, 2009, and 2010, where the tomb was completely destroyed. These are the damages that have been documented. We can see the extent of the damages and the time of the damages very clearly. These are some of the photos that also show how the entrance or the gate of the tomb was also damaged because of the illegal activities. And these are some photos of the wall of the entrance and the north wall, and also the retentive floor. There are some decay, and these are because of climate conditions, not because of the violations. In 2015 and 2016, the local community reported that ISIS used this tomb as a vantage point. That's why it was targeted by the US-led coalition, which led to massive damage, especially in the north wall. You can see here the extent of these damages here in this photo. In order to understand the motivations that led to these violations, we conducted interviews with the local community in the vicinity of this archaeological site, and also to understand from them the chronological order of these violations. They noted that the violations started before the conflict, and gradually they increased, the extent of these violations increased until serious damage was inflicted in this site. The local community in general was culturally aware of the importance of archaeological sites. However, their behavior did not reflect this awareness at all occasions. And their behavior or practices were motivated by various motivations. This is the village where the archaeological site, the tomb, was located. You can see that the village or the community is very closely is close to the site. Based on the interviews, we concluded that these are the key influencing factors, starting with poverty and unemployment and feeling of injustice and marginalization, corruption, as well as lack of hope for change. All of these factors, in fact, did not only affect this archaeological site, but affected in general the entire relationship between the local community and archaeological sites. I'll skip some of the points in order not to exceed the time allowed for me. But you can see here some of the quotes by the local communities. When we asked them, what do you know about Shash Hamdan? And what does it mean to you? Do you think it's important? And everyone agreed that it's a very important part of the local cultural heritage and it should be protected. However, when we asked them whether they've been involved in the digging activities, many of them were. They said that the injustices, the unfair treatment they've been treated with, pushed them to react in this way and to start destroying archaeological sites. The government, for example, seized the lands owned by farmers and compensated them unfairly. They were provided with minimal amounts of money for the seized lands. All of these practices have led to this reaction among the local community. One of them said, in what way do you address people who are marginalized, hungry, poor, and unemployed, with no present and with no future to think about, and ask them to protect the past? So when this person was saying these words, he was about to burst into tears. People were saying, nobody knows that we exist. They feel that they are completely excluded and marginalized from the entire world around them. The area in general is completely neglected by the government. Another important factor that influenced the behavior of the local community was the lack of clarity of how religious precepts apply to antiquities. We don't have, people were saying that we don't have any evidence that this is something prohibited or haram, as we say in Islam. However, we have inherited this idea that it is that antiquities and cultural heritage is something bad, something harmful. So there is this prevailing idea that this is something prohibited. We can say that the responses we got from interviewees reflect that very clearly. For example, people were saying cultural heritage, antiquities are something public and public property. That's why we have the right to go and dig there. It is not something forbidden. In fact, this was a very insightful experience for me because I've been able to dig deep into the details of what's happening in Syria. The regime used to present cultural heritage to us as if it's only one color, one thing. But in fact, Syria is very diverse, and we have many local communities who have their different attitudes. And it's really important to understand all of these attitudes in order to truly protect the Syrian cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adnan. Really fascinating research, and I'm sure we're going to have a ton of questions, especially about sort of all the diverse community responses to cultural heritage in this area. But we're going to move on to our next presentation right now. So I'm going to introduce Adnan Rashid Mamo, who I've had the pleasure of working with along with the rest of his team, Ismail Ibrahim, Amal Qasim, and Adnan Al-Khalil, who've been working with me on a project looking at cultural heritage and Al-Hasakah. So Adnan Rashid Mamo got his PhD in ancient history from Ain Shams University in Egypt before being appointed to the Department of History at the University of Aleppo in Syria. He's also taught at various Turkish universities. He's very interested in cultural heritage of the ancient Near East, particularly with a focus on the protection of Syrian cultural heritage during the conflict. And he's published historical and archaeological papers in international peer-reviewed journals and supervised both master's and doctoral students. So Adnan, please, if you share with us a bit about your research.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. Peace be upon you.
بحثنا بعنوان تأثير الحرب السورية على المواقع الأثرية في محافظة الحسكة.
Our research is entitled The Impact of Conflict in Syria on Archaeological Sites. We have Ahmed Khalil, Amal Qasim, and Ahmed Al-Khalil Adnan Mamo, supervised by Dr. Kristen Hopper and supported by Cara. In March 2011, a peaceful revolution erupted in Syria, calling for social and political reforms and economic reforms, but then it started to call for the fall of the regime. But about 7 months later, the revolution took up arms and chaos took over, and of course, chaos included Al-Hasakah, which is the area of study. It is in northeastern Syria, bordered from the north by Turkey and from the east by Iraq. It is a very rich area, so rich in archaeological sites that an Italian archaeologist said it is richer in archaeological sites than in oil, and that it is one of the richest around the world. Al-Hasakah Governorate has 4 main areas: Al-Malikiyya, Qamishli, Ras Al-Ain, and Al-Hasakah City. The political situation in the Governorate of Al-Hasakah, the revolution was all over Al-Hasakah, but when revolution was militarized, the FSA took over part of Al-Hasakah, particularly Ras Al-Ain, after which they withdrew. And then it fell under the governance of PYD, which later became to be known as Hassan. In 2014, after ISIS several attempts to take over Al-Hasakah, Barack Obama, the American president, declared the establishment of a counter-ISIS international coalition, and Hasakah was totally liberated from ISIS in 2016, and it was the first governorate to get rid completely from ISIS control. In 2018, Turkish troops took over parts of Al-Hasakah, particularly Ras Al-Ain, under the Spring of Peace, Operation Spring Peace, and this control included Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain. Al-Hasakah now is completely under the control of SDF and the international coalition, except for two security squares and security zones for the regime in Al-Hasakah and Qamishli cities. The purpose of this study is to evaluate and assess the impact of the Syrian war on archaeological Hasakah through analysis of satellite images and previously published information. We literally inspected high definition satellite images of Al-Hasakah taken between 2004 and 2020 in order to identify archaeological sites which were excavated previously or registered or seen in satellite images, in addition to identifying unregistered archaeological sites, and finally in assessing in details the situation of those sites. And we provided the EMINA project with the data from previously published investigative studies. Data analysis: around 340 archaeological sites afflicted or damaged in Al-Hasakah were analyzed. This depended on their prior registration, in addition to non-registered archaeological areas, using satellite images of the time between 2011 and 2020. This is a map of the locations or sites analyzed by our team. As this chart shows the kind of disturbance or the disturbance type between 2004 and 2020, we noticed that most damages are incurred by agricultural or pastoral reasons, then by domestic or for housing purposes, as the stones or the rocks of the archaeological sites are removed for housing and building purposes. There is also looting and military damages, particularly between 2011 and 2016, in which we had the anti-ISIS battle between SDF and the international coalition and ISIS. On the other hand, the area was bombarded by international coalition or was used as barracks and barricades by SDF. These are examples of the types of disturbances. We have this site AH185. You can see that this region has been used for agricultural purposes, and in 2016 this site was also used as a barricade in the battles ongoing in the area. This site AH329, we have this road that has been built in this area that crosses the middle of this archaeological sites. This site AH021, we find these illegal excavations. You can see the excavation holes as are clear. This is the map which shows all types of disturbances of the different damages. You can see that they are color coded. In red, agricultural damages, in yellow, domestic damages or disturbances, etc. Here we have a chart that shows the types of disturbances to those sites and the percentage of those sites in a chart. And we notice the increase in looting between 2011 and 2014, and also the increase of military disturbances between 2014 and 2016. As we said previously, this is the period in which we had a very fierce battles between ISIS and the international coalition. And this chart also shows that agricultural disturbances in particular continue to occur in most archaeological sites in Hasakah. The conclusions or the findings, this study covers 340 archaeological sites in the governorate of Al-Hasakah between 2004 and 2020. It offered valuable information about the disturbances to those sites, including the main factors that had an impact. The looting and military activity affected a lot of places or sites in Al-Hasakah and along Al-Khabur to the northeast, to the northwest of Al-Hasakah. We also issued a list of 50 sites that require urgent and immediate intervention by national and international organizations and institutions. The criteria for this list are previously excavated sites or sites that may disappear due to flooding or due to huge disturbances that could render them meaningless as archaeological sites. At the end of this presentation, I would like to thank Cara for their support in undertaking this research. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Adnan. It's wonderful to see how much your research has come on the sites in Hasakah. We're going to move now to Mahmoud Zin Alabadin, who hopefully is there. Mahmoud? Hi.
Yes.
Mahmoud
Good afternoon.
Zin Alabadin is a lecturer in the Faculty of Architecture at Yildiz Technical University in Turkey, and a visiting scholar at the School of Classics in the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. He's interested in Ottoman architecture in the Middle East and has worked on the preservation and restoration of historical buildings in Syria. Currently, he's carrying out research on the reconstruction of Aleppo, as we'll hear about in a moment, supported by the Cara Syria Programme, and has published several books on architecture, including The City of Aleppo and Its Traditional Houses. He's also working as an architectural consultant in cultural heritage and for ICMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites. So thank you very much, Mahmoud. Sorry to cut you off a bit there, but I wanted to make sure to introduce you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank Cara for this opportunity. In fact, I'd like to note that this research was conducted in collaboration with my colleague, Dr Adnan Almohamad, and under the mentorship of Dr Raqqa and Dr Nigel. I think you can see the slides now. So our research is about cultural heritage between destruction and reconstruction under the conflict and its impact on the Syrian identity. It focuses on the city of Aleppo, which is one of the oldest populated cities in the world, and it's a unique case study. In our research, we depended on the city plans as well as on images from the city before the conflict and after it. This topic about restoration, reserving and restoring cultural heritage is an important one. That's why we focused on 3 research questions. First of all, to understand the importance of the reconstruction work, and of course, we are asking this question from the perspective of the governments and the perspective of local communities. We have also asked a question about the criteria that the Syrian authorities are following when they are selecting the building to be restored. And finally, we asked a question about whether the current restoration work is in line with international standards, and what are the main challenges and difficulties that are facing this work of restoration. As you may know, Aleppo University, Aleppo city was or suffered from destruction that was varying from one place to another. With or at the beginning of 2017, the restoration work started. Here you can see some of the large extent destruction that affected the Khasrawi school. As I've mentioned, the building sustained different levels of destruction and damages. Some of them are partially destroyed, others are completely destroyed. Of course, in our research, it was not possible to cover all the sites in the city. That's why limited to 5 locations. The Umayyad Mosque, it's in the city center. And the second one is Al-Hasakah Souk, or marketplace. And the third is Beit Basil, it's one of the traditional houses in the region. The fourth is Buria restaurant, and the last one is Dar Abu Huda As-Sayadi. Our methodology was standardized for all 5 locations. So it's a case study that started with a historical background, followed by a description from an architect's perspective, and then we talked about the restoration work and the current situation of this building. Of course, with an assessment of the damages before talking about the current situation. We have documented the extent of the damage in each of these locations, and we also provided a timeline of the restoration work. Here you can see, for example, that the restoration is still ongoing. The minaret of the mosque is completely renovated and restored now, but the rest of it is not yet. About Al-Saqtiya marketplace, it's one of the largest traditional markets in around the world. And here is the documentation of the extent of the damages, and then a description of the restoration work, followed by an assessment, the assessment of these restorations. And this one was very successful, in fact, and it was awarded at international level because it was in line with international standards. The same methodology was used in order to assess the damages, describing the restoration work, and then assessing the overall work. And this is for the third site now with Pirawiya restaurants. Originally, it was the building was a bank that was established in 1889, and it was turned into a restaurant later. There are various types of damages that affected this building. Here you can see that there are huge differences in the restoration work from one front or facade to another. And the last location is Dar Abu Huda Sayadi. It's one of the buildings that are located in the vicinity of the castle. This building sustained also massive damages, and we also have prepared or managed to obtain the plan or the structure of this building, and we assessed the damages it sustained, and then we described the restoration and assessed those restoration work. Finally, I'd like to talk about the findings of our research. We've noted that there has been no standard criteria for selecting the buildings to be restored by the government. So it was something happening randomly without any strategic approach. Also, though these archaeological buildings have been restored, private property was not, and the individual citizens were not able to bear the expenses of restoring their own property. In addition to the challenge because of the shortage of the engineers and the qualified workers who can conduct this type of work, this is because of the brain drain and the continued waves of migrations from Syria. Of course, finally, it's important to note that the impact of the damages to the cultural heritage and to the sites and infrastructure definitely affects the Syrian identity and the local community. Many of the families have been displaced, they've been scattered in different locations around the world. The children are not aware or informed about the situation or about these sites. Finally, I'd like to thank Cara for giving me this opportunity to work on this type of research, especially with my colleague Adnan, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So we're going to invite Adnan Almohamad back again to talk about one more project. But just before that, to let you know that we are getting your questions coming in, and we will go towards audience questions shortly after we have some other questions for our speakers. So Adnan, are you there again?
معنا الآن.
Please go ahead, Adnan.
أنا موجود.
تفضل عدنان لو سمحت. شكرا جزيلا كريستين. Peace be upon you all. I come back to you with another quick presentation about the destruction and looting of cultural heritage sites in Syria by ISIS. The case study is Manbij and its countryside, and also this research was done under the supervision of Professor Jane Baird from London. This research aims at identifying and revealing the destruction made and the damages made in most important heritage sites, as well as unveiling the systematic approach used by ISIS on looting those cultural heritage sites, and to investigate the economic motive behind used by ISIS. This is the map of the governorate of Aleppo. We have here some of the sites that were damaged under ISIS. The other map is also for Aleppo. In yellow, this is the area of Manbij. This is the center of the city of Manbij, and we noticed that as soon as ISIS took control of this area since 2012 to 2016, when it left after battles with SDF and international coalition. As soon as it took the control of this area, they took control of those sites and used them as security and sites for their organization. Our work on the ground at the time, we noticed that the relation between ISIS has different with those sites was on three levels or three phases. The first was the phase of destruction. At the time, it accessed the area and continued until they left. Of course, there is no verse or indication in Quran or in the Prophet Muhammad's Sunnah that calls people to destroy those ruins, but they used and cited the practice of the Prophet Muhammad when he destroyed the idols used for worship by the pagans in Mecca around the holy Kaaba, and this was a specific period of time when they were used for worship, but Muslims, when they conquered other areas, they did not follow that practice actually. But when ISIS accessed those areas, they destroyed many of the ruins in the garden or the park of Manbij, and they destroyed some of the Sufi sites, such as the tomb of Aruja in the to the south of Manbij. We notice here before its destruction, but this is this site by satellite images, and it was totally demolished. In addition to the tomb of a Sheikh Aqil in the center of the city of Manbij, as well as destroying some ruins and artifacts from Palmyra, and it also destroyed all the pictures or the mosaic pictures that run contrary to its understanding. You notice here the destruction of the faces. This was recovered a little by the archaeological unit in Manbij, but it wasn't totally recovered, of course. The other phase was benefiting from antiquities taxes. After we started to understand, of course, the fact that some local traders have seduced ISIS also to use those artifacts as a source of revenue. But the concept of ruins or antiquities was not clear for ISIS at the beginning. So they looked at them as, you know, findings or treasures to be found and provided to ISIS, and provided by the people who would find them would be provided by 20% of their value. In this case, any person, be it a military or Sharia officer, could actually issue an order to loot archaeological areas. The third phase was institutionalization and exploitation of all kinds of artifacts. So in this case, we had a full-fledged attack on cultural heritage as defined internationally. Here we have the special the exterior of قسم الآثار in Manbij. In this phase, anything related to the management of archaeology, of antiquities, of managing the looting process and transporting them had to go through قسم الآثار. No one can provide any license without going back to or referring to قسم الآثار, and previous licenses were annulled, and new licenses have to be and authorizations have to be provided. In this phase, ISIS itself started to excavate and look for those artifacts, which have come to include even pottery work and pottery artifacts. Of course, the interest of ISIS in those artifacts was quite early when they started to take over dams, oil wells, power electricity and even water for irrigation. But when ISIS took over the artifacts, they did it for reasons because of the looting. They did, and because the other sources of abductions and robbery were not profitable anymore, and also even the oil was targeted, and oil sites were targeted by the international coalition and were no longer as profitable and risk-free. So the artifacts started to emerge as an important source of income for ISIS. So they constituted a very important source of income for ISIS. There, of course, were some documents leaked that would prove ISIS's role in this issue. This is the document saying that ISIS allows people to excavate and to take 20% of the value of the artifact they find. Also, this is the receipt. Even people who owned artifacts, they were given an ultimatum to give over and hand over those artifacts, particularly if they have found them without a license from ISIS. And some of those documents were forged in order to avoid punishment by ISIS. And this is a letter by the Amir al-Diwan to allocate a specific funding for excavation for Qasm al-Athar. So it was given a special budget instead of being dependent on taxes. It started to run the dossier of excavation and finding artifacts. This is another document about specific areas in Manbij, and this is an image of one of the workshops of ISIS that was excavating or digging in the southern of Manbij. Here we see the image of the ISIS official behind whom there is the metal detector, and here they were using the metal detector, and this is one of the warehouses in which ISIS members were storing those artifacts. This is another image. This is very important because we see in this image some human and animal artifacts, and of course, importantly, ISIS does not or did not say it doesn't excavate because they claim that they give it no value, but actually they what's behind the scenes is that they were trading in those artifacts and those pieces and antiquities. Of course, this financial motive for ISIS was rather strong because ISIS considered the Kurds to be atheists and infidels and not to be dealt with. And also the regime were infidels as well and should be fought to the end, and the same applies to the FSA. But when it comes to money, it did not mind having and striking deals with the regime or other parties. So you find convoys between SDF and the regime and ISIS, and there are a lot of articles written in this regard. But when it comes to Syrians themselves doing the same, they would receive severe punishment by ISIS. Unfortunately, this is the tragic result or the tragic reality. This is the house in which I lived for 3 years when I was displaced from Raqqa to Manbij, and I tried to document the violations then. Very sad days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adnan. That was a wonderful presentation and a good one to end on. We've got a few questions now for all of our speakers before we go to the questions that we've got in the chat. Adnan, I want to ask you first about your research at Shash Hamdan that you started with. And I know it's coming out soon in the Journal of Eastern Mediterranean and Eastern Mediterranean Archaeology and Heritage Studies, sorry. But given the great number of, the great diversity of opinion that came through it from the community in that situation, I was just curious what you think, or what's the one point from that community that you'd like the audience tonight to take away from your presentation?
من مقابلاتكم التي أجريتموها ما هي أهم نقطة؟ Thank you for this important question. Actually, I have mentioned in my quick presentation that the local community and understanding the perspective of the local community and their perceptions and attitudes towards archaeological sites is vital, because it is the local community that is the main stakeholder and the main beneficiary of those archaeological sites, and their attitude towards those archaeological sites affect the present and the future of those archaeological sites. Hence the importance of that attitude, and hence the importance of those studies in which we change the misconception that Syria is a homogeneous and a monotonous community and has the same perspective. The situation is much more complicated. There is a lot of disappointment and a sense of marginalization with the lack of interest in their situation. This reflects their connection with archaeological sites. So what is important here is that we could say we should not consider archaeology separate from the society or the social context. So if we think this way, unfortunately, those scenarios are going to recur, and archaeological sites would continue to be subject to such damages.
Thank you very much. So next, we wanted to just move on to a question for Adnan Mamo. So Adnan, working with you, I know that your team has compiled data on more than 300 sites, and you've also said you produced a list of 50 sites that you think are most in danger of damage. And I wanted you to just, if you could tell us a bit more about the criteria that you use to sort of select the sites that you think are most threatened, and how do you think this information can help us with heritage preservation going forward?
Thank you for asking this question, Kristen. In fact, we have a list of criteria. First of all is to make sure it's one of the locations that were already excavated previously before the conflict. You know that in Hasakah itself only there are more than 200 archaeological sites that were not excavated previously. The second criteria is being endangered of being completely covered by water, especially in Al-Khabur area, because of the rise in the water level. The other criteria is to be a unique location, such as being from certain historical era, such as Hellenistic or other unique periods in the history. There are, as I said, many other locations that were not excavated previously, and those locations can reveal important ideas about the previous cultures and civilizations. Uh, so this is very briefly the criteria we used.
Thank you, Adnan. It's really important, and I think we'll come back to that in some of the questions from the chat. But next, I want to move back to Mahmoud to ask about Aleppo. So you made in your presentation a number of really important points about the ongoing restoration work in Aleppo. I was curious what you wanted to see happen next. So especially with regard to other types of buildings, such as houses, which I know you have an interest in. Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
Thank you for asking such an important question. In fact, as I mentioned very briefly in my presentation, these restoration projects were funded by international agencies such as Umayyad Mosque and Sakatiya Mosque, Sakatiya Souk. And I noted very briefly that it's important to focus on individual property as well, because we cannot keep focusing on traditional buildings without enabling the community to return to their homes. This is part of our recommendation to balance the priorities in order to enable local residents to return to their home areas. For example, this could be achieved through enabling local individuals to ask for or to get loans from government banks, for example. In fact, it's not limited to residential houses here, but as we were preparing for this study, we noted that some industrial or commercial buildings could be restored or should be restored rather. However, they are their owners are in need of funding in order to do that. But with their available resources, that is not something doable or achievable. Ensuring the restoration of these residential and commercial buildings will gradually add to reviving the social life in these areas.
Thank you very much. So now I had a question for you, Hassan. So your presentation, it gave us a really fascinating sort of insight into graffiti as a form of communication that's maybe not always paid as much attention to. And what I'm really interested to know is, could you tell us a bit more about whether or not there were particular kinds of spaces that were utilized, or did graffiti happen on particular structures? I know you did mention schools, but just wondering a bit more about the context of the graffiti that you were recording.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Usually, I mean, the surfaces or spaces are common everywhere when people won't just draw graffiti. And as you mentioned, and as I said, the choose schools because they have very huge walls, and this is practice. You know, this is very practical for them. But it depends on the draggers or the graffiti authors also. I mean, for that first type, I mean, which I called neutral graffiti. I mean, young people, young taggers or graffiti authors use every surface or spaces or on houses, but not the military authors. I mean, the military graffiti authors. So in general, military graffiti are drawn both from outside and inside, schools, and especially also on um, that destroyed buildings also, and the visible places. You know, it could be in market or around squares. Yeah. For the other kind of graffiti, again, it depends, sometimes on time, on occasions also. So we could say they use whatever structures or places, but these places have to be again more visible, for viewers. Yeah.
Thanks, Hassan. That's so interesting because it's about, it seems obvious that it's in a place people can see it, but that means that it's meant to have an audience, and so it is really ties into the idea of graffiti as communication. And we'll come back to that, I think. But for now, I've got one more question for Adnan Almohamad on his second presentation on Manbij and the region around it. And Adnan, you undertook this research documenting the antiquities ministry of ISIS long before you started working with Cara, long before you had funding to do it. Definitely a time when it was incredibly dangerous to do so. So I just wanted to hear a bit about your motivations for doing it during such a dangerous time in your home, to take the kind of risks that you must have taken. If you could tell us a bit about that.
Thank you, Jan, for asking the question. It's a very big and difficult question, in fact, but let me try to simplify it. For me, it's a matter of passion. I've been in love with antiquities. I started studying Arabic literature in the university, and I gave up. I dropped out, and I resumed my education in the antiquities department. And I'm glad that I was successful in completing my education in this department, in this discipline. When ISIS invaded the region and started conducting various forms of violations against the community, I took the decision of saving my family and moving them outside this region. However, there has been always this sense of responsibility. And though I managed to save them, they've always supported me and supported my work, and I felt that they have been always there for me. There are many of the colleagues who worked with me. We were working as a team. We were, of course, at risk, as you've said, and each of us felt true fear at one moment or another. But some of us managed to get very close to ISIS and to take first-hand photos of their violations.
Thank you so much for that, Adnan. I'm going to move now to some of the questions that have been coming in the chat, and we'll start with one for you, Adnan Almohamad, while you're still here up front. And it's a question that comes from Ayman Al-Nabo. We both know it's lovely to see so many Syrian archaeologists here this evening. Ayman Al-Nabo asks, he says, thank you, Adnan. You always focus on the violations to archaeological sites in your research, and he wants to point out that there are some academics abroad who distort the image of the local community that works on the protection of antiquities, saying that individuals are affiliated with one of the conflicting parties. So one of the groups. These allegations put specialists at risk, so specialists inside the country at risk, and push them to abandon their hard work in protecting antiquities within Syria. So he asks if you can clarify through your experience a bit more about that relationship, both between external commentators, I guess, and communities and archaeologists on the ground.
Thank you for asking this question, Dr. Ayman, who's also a dear colleague and who works in risky areas. Oh, in fact, we are facing a difficulty in accessing these locations, and of course, it's not easier for the local community, or at least not much easier for the local community to access those locations and to protect them. And unfortunately, the international community has failed to protect the Syrians and the Syrian cultural heritage. And even to the exact contrary, we are being accused, as Ayman said, sometimes we're accused of being criminals destroying this cultural heritage. And unfortunately, I am saddened to say that it's the responsibility of the international community because they are the ones who pushed people to this extent. We need from the international community to take action and to start protecting these locations. However, despite all of these accusations, we need to continue working, and we need to make every possible effort in order to uncover the reality and the truth of what's happening inside Syria. And I hope that gradually we will be able to change this perception of the local communities.
Thank you very much, Adnan. I hope so too. I now have a question for Adnan Mamo, and this is from Anwar Kanawi, and he wants to say thank you, Dr. Mamo. He has two questions. So the first question, maybe I'll start with the first question and get your answer, and then we'll go to the second, is do you think that the results of your research, being that obviously you were using a lot of satellite imagery, were the results sufficient, in your opinion, without an audit or without looking at the data by a field team working on the ground? Can you tell us about this?
Thank you for your question. At the beginning, the project was designed so that we have a field visit to Al-Hasakah and see the archaeological sites in person. But unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 epidemic, we had a travel ban, and that's why we replaced this with satellite imaging, in addition to the many reports we received from the governorate of Al-Hasakah, particularly reports about the assessment and evaluation of some of those archaeological sites by the autonomous administration in northeastern Syria, in addition to reports by international organizations and reports by the Directorate of Museums and Archaeological Sites in Damascus. I know that all of this is not sufficient, but unfortunately, COVID-19 epidemic situation did not allow us to undertake field visits. Could you please provide me with the second question?
Yes, thank you. So the second part of the question from Anwar was, are there ethical considerations for why you used codes or unique site names for the archaeological sites in the study instead of using their common names?
لا الأمر ليس sorry it's not about the use of codes. As I mentioned, there are thousands of archaeological areas in Hasakah, and understanding or knowing the common name is impossible, as it is registered in the archaeological site directorate, and also because we used the Armina, the database, we used the codes, the code names consistent with the Amina project, because our research has become an integral part of that project. Of course, not Amina only, but any researcher around the world can take over our work and build on it. So that was the choice we made in using those codes in order to facilitate communication about them.
Thank you. I mean, I think that reflects a bit back to what Adnan Almohamad was saying about the diverse nature of Syria, where you might get multiple site names for one archaeological site from different communities in the area, and using different ways of recording that. So thank you very much.
I'm going to use my privilege here tonight to ask Hassan a question now, if I may, about graffiti. And Hassan, one of the things that you mentioned was the growth in the amount of graffiti that was recorded in Raqqa after the conflict, and or as things started. And I wanted to ask you about why. So particularly when it came to the kind of ones that you call neutral, so the individual marks that were made. I was wondering if you had ideas or interpretations about what the impulse was there. So like what's happening? So is it that it's more permissible to do that because of a lack of civic authority? Is it that there's an increased need to express yourself in a situation that is maybe precarious or historically important moment? What do you think is driving this this kind of increased amount of graffiti during this time?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting question. Well, I didn't have time, to expand on the choose, the reason of writing this graffiti. But again, it depends on the authors, because we don't have rules actually for a graffiti. We cannot consider graffiti in Raqqa like vandalism, because people, they just want to communicate, and for the neutral type of graffiti, yeah, you have right, asking this question. Usually people, they just want to express themselves and, to mark something like personal, like they want to mention, in general in Syria, really like a love story, about or poetry verses. And this is amazing. So that's why I said before. So they use, whatever. I mean, any surface, writable, to show, themselves, and people, they do like, their names or this graffiti written. Even though they're very small, sometimes for this kind of graffiti, the first type, and usually it's amazing. I'm very happy here to listen to my colleagues, because I think we have something in common in terms of memory construction, even though working on the visual materials and visual culture. But I think we want to somehow to document, this transformation movement, whether by, archaeological way or graffiti also. So in general, people, they also, I think Adnan Mamo and my colleagues, other Adnan Almohamad, they would agree that people, they use this kind of graffiti even on archaeological things. Myself, I've been in Aleppo, and I visit many times, Aleppo Castle, and I was like, every time I see this graffiti like Ali, Muhammad, whatever, I said, oh my God, why they're just, writing their names? So what's the meaning, and so it didn't make sense for me, but for this author, yeah, they like to, visualize things. I mean, I think there are many different contexts, for these people, but usually it's just, to show, themselves through graffiti and visual things. But again, for the military context is more clear in terms of materials and writing. As I said, there's official authorities that organize the work. So, and there's always something ideological behind that. They would to, grab attention, to environmental things or pollution or even drugs. And recently in Raqqa, the COVID-19. So it really depends on the context and the political stability also. This is another major factor, that show how people, they use this spaces. Yeah, does this make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. I could ask you a lot more questions, but I won't just yet. But it is really fascinating, and I think you're right that one of the threads that links to the other papers is very much about the construction of memory and memorialization, but also what we do then with that. So it's really important that you're documenting these in the way that you are photographically. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I actually have another question from Anwar Kanawi, and this time it's for Mahmoud about Aleppo. And so, Mahmoud, do you think that the timing is appropriate for the restoration works that are taking place in Aleppo, particularly given the absence of a complete study of the reconstruction project for the whole city, so that we do not see, faulty restoration or poor restoration works that would take the city out of its historical and urban context?
Thank you, Anwar, for this important question. Of course, this issue of the timing of restoration could take place, but this is not related to timing actually as much as it is related to the priorities of this point in time. We noticed, as we mentioned in our study, that this restorations were random. There was no comprehensive plan in the reconstruction and reinvigoration of Aleppo city. This is something we focused upon. So before we start with restoration, we cannot focus on one side apart from the others and ignoring the surroundings. This is important. The other point is that, as I mentioned, we need a plan, or what we could call a strategy, a clear strategy to start reconstruction and restoration and renovation. In addition, with regards to the issue of the identity of the area, as I mentioned in the study, some of the projects did not focus on or were not guided by international standards and criteria for many reasons, by the way, which I could overview quickly when I mentioned lack of qualification and lack of labor force and even lack of supervision. During our study, we noticed that big projects with the big or external funding were consistent with international standards, but smaller projects that we did not cover in this study, such as the renovation of some of the mosques by local charitable persons or local philanthropists, did not recognize or follow international standards, and there were some transgressions and some deformation of the original construction or structure. As I mentioned, this issue is quite broad, and I cannot overview it as a whole. As I mentioned, we looked at 5 cases, but we should not overlook the other cases. So in terms of timing, timing may be appropriate, but those restorations or renovations must be in recognition of international standards, and even in our recommendations, we mentioned recommendations that I did not review here that are addressed at the government and are addressed to international organizations, such as training and supporting renovation centers. If those recommendations are fulfilled, we may increase the number of qualified persons and craftsmen and engineers and experts necessary for those renovations. So if a comprehensive strategy exists with the appropriate qualified team for the reconstruction of Aleppo may be renovated correctly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So actually, Hassan, I believe you had a question that you wanted to ask your colleagues now. So please, if I could turn it over to you to ask your question.
Thank you, Kristen. Actually, I have a question for all of my colleagues, because really it's the research are very interesting to me. And I'm wondering if they're all planning to deepen their research and follow the evolution, of this works and other things. I'm wondering also if the Syrian regime, I don't know if they rate, the Syrian law in terms of archaeological protection. So because do they think I don't know, the Syrian regime, they try to protect or not the Syrian heritage, especially for the Shah. I mean, the first presentation of by Adnan Almohamad, because I'm saying this because sometimes we have that feeling there is like a historical battle in terms of archaeological heritage. Like some authorities would like to erase or wipe off, some archaeological sites, in order to also to occult or hide this some verities or realities behind this actions. So I'm wondering if there's this Syrian regime, they, if the Syrian regime did something on purpose in order to, because you have the feeling that sometimes, the Syrian regime doesn't care, about archaeological sites. So what are the techniques? I mean, if there's some, done by Syrian regime to, just leave people, control this archaeological, sites and don't care, about them. And another, in the final, just, question about the final presentation by Adnan Almohamad. I really love this poetry, this poetry, dropped by ISIS. But do you know, Adnan, where there are this, archaeological pieces in this poetry? Thank you so much, guys.
Would anyone like to respond first?
هل هناك من يرغب بالتعليق بداية؟
Adnan, excellent. Please go ahead.
عدنان تفضل.
تسمحوا لنا نجيب؟
May I start? Adnan Mamo is asking.
أنا دكتور عدنان مامو.
Who should start? Adnan Mamo or Adnan Almohamad?
Thank you, دكتور عدنان. في الحقيقة نحن في بلد للأسف يضع
In fact, we're in a country where, unfortunately, we have proper laws, but they are not enacted properly. The Syrian regime stole everything in Syria, stole its wealth and store its law and everything related to it, and everything became exclusive to the Assad family. The Syrian laws of antiquity, if implemented correctly, they are good enough in order to protect the Syrian cultural heritage, in my opinion. However, unfortunately, the case or the reality is not as such. Before the war, we have witnessed various violations committed by individuals and entities affiliated with the Syrian regime. And those groups and individuals were so powerful, and no one could stand up to them. For example, one of the archaeological sites in Aleppo was completely destroyed, and instead a new hotel was established and constructed in that location. So the regime systematically destroys the cultural heritage. During the war, various landmarks of the cultural heritage have been targeted by the Syrian regime. And in fact, the restoration work in Aleppo is part of this systematic destruction. Though some of these restorations are in fact done properly, however, they're not, if we look at the bigger picture, they are not. Thank you, Dr. Adnan, for this answer. In fact, the local legislations in Syria are one of the most strict regulations in the region. However, they are not enacted equally. They are enacted on the typical Syrians, on the public. However, the powerful affiliated with the Syrian regime are not bound by these legislations. Some of them are private individuals who own private jets and who can travel to any archaeological site and start digging and excavating without anyone questioning their behaviors and their practices. The antiquities department in Syria was established in the 1997 or 96. However, how come that such a country so rich with archaeological sites managed only to open the antiquities department in the late 90s? It reflects the level of indifference, that is to say, the indifference of the government. But it was established, this department was established in order to get the money from the Canadian governments and other donors. But it's not because they genuinely care about any of this cultural heritage. The Syrian regime's policy is focused on the coastal governorates, and the rest are of the Syrian resources, including the human resources, the richness in archaeological sites and antiquities. All of this is utilized to serve those in the coastal cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mahmoud, did you want to come in on any of that, or shall we? I think we can move to our next one.
I am not specialized in archaeology, but I'd like to comment very briefly that restoration work in general should involve various local directorates, including the committee who's responsible for the restoration of the city in general, the Directorate of Tourism, and the Directorate of Awqaf. And they are expected to be coordinating and thinking or developing strategies in order to carry the the restoration work. However, what I have realized during conducting my own research, I sense the lack of coordination between those entities and the institutions, and their concern is not always about the international standards, in addition to the shortages in qualifications. This is from my perspective as an architect, but I cannot talk to the specialty of antiquities.
Thank you for that. We have another question from the audience that's directed at all of you, at all of our speakers this evening, from Basma El-Duki, and relates back to this issue of memory that we were talking about. She thanks all of you for very interesting and important documentation, and asks, how do you hope that the work of each of your works can be received and acknowledged as part of Syria's oral or written or documented historical archive for the younger generations of Syrians who've never lived in Syria and who have been born and lived in exile? So what do you hope of your work for those Syrians? Any of you want to tackle that?
ممكن.
Yeah, go ahead, Adnan.
طبعا أملنا بإنشاء يعني جيل يهتم بآثار
We hope,
بلده
first of all, that the next generations will be interested in our Syrian cultural heritage and will be aware of its importance. It's a shame if
أصحاب حضارة وتراث عريق جدا ولدينا الآلاف
if we lose this very rich civilization that we have inherited,
الاهتمام والتنقيب المناسب
or if we
بمناسبات معينة.
neglect
في مسد تشرين تم إجراء حملات دولية
these locations and to remember them only on occasion. In fact, we've witnessed such a restoration work only when there was an urgent situation, when those sites are threatened and about to disappear completely. When I was a lecturer in the university, I used to try to arrange field visits for my students. However, due to the limited resources and the bureaucracy, however, that's why it was not an easy thing to do. And despite all of the efforts, we used to manage to organize one tour or one visit every year. And what is surprising is after we organize this visit and we go there, we are surprised that there is no touring guide or even security protecting the location. Just imagine that there is that the faculty, the university, does not provide us even with the transport, does not provide us to take the students there. This is the minimum that should be provided to the students who are studying in the antiquities department. That is the general policy by the government, and unfortunately, it was not only indifferent to the cultural heritage, but they have been working on erasing this cultural heritage and never cared to highlight the importance of this cultural heritage to the Syrian public. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan. Yeah, Adnan Almohamad, was that your voice that I heard? Did you want to speak, Adnan, or? Okay. Thank you for that. I think one of the things that it's important to note is that I know all of you are bearing witness to things in as much as you're depositing your research and publishing your research, whether it's through the Amina database that you mentioned, Adnan Mamo, or through institutional repositories. And I think even just that is really important, that all of that documentation is being made and is being kept. Hassan, go ahead. And actually, while I got you, Hassan, Basma had another question. So you can give your response, and then I have another question for you to follow up.
Well, I'm afraid I interrupt you. Okay, this is just going back to your question. I think we need to spur people on working on the medium question in order to spread out, this question of memory. I'm interested in this notion by Jean Genreau, who is a French professor in communication. So he used this very smart word, which is that trivialization. So trivialisation in French. So to just spread this different knowledge, I think, and study through different media, the evolution of this, this knowledge, whether visual things or archaeological, political things. And that's why I feel grateful for Cara also, to give us this opportunity to try to publish our works. And by the way, I try to, I'm in documentary films. So I've tried to apply for, a grant from Cara, but, unfortunately, Middle Fellowship does not support this kind of resource. So that's why I'm, mentioned this question of visual memory, political and social memory to be diffused, aired maybe on TV or everywhere. But again, this needs, to be supported, on different ways, I think.
Absolutely. And I hope your documentary gets made. I have a question that I'll ask you to answer briefly if you can, Hassan. Another one from Basma. It's a good one. She says, as a young third generation of Palestinians, I learned graffiti as a way of resistance, keeping a sense of belonging, memory, and individual and collective identity and rights. What do you think that the younger generations of Syria will look at this kinds of, will think of this kind of art and documentation when they look at it?
Yeah, I think this is a technical question and economical question also, in line with the support, the financial support and materialistic support of this production of graffiti. Like in Palestine, people, they don't have material, so they use everything, to communicate. And we have a very interesting example in Syria. I don't know if you heard about this city of Binish. I think my colleagues, they know about Binish, which is a small city in Idlib area. We had this resistant movement, peaceful movement, during which through this movement, people and activists, taggers and graffiti authors, they try to really construct a form of resistance through this, drawing. And the whole city, they participate in this production. So, this is amazing because there's a very, tremendous, discourse, linguistics and visual discourse behind this. That's to say, people, they try to, spread out this message, peaceful message through just, with words and images. So I think, this is a good way. And what I like in this way of peaceful resistance is, it's that the people, they keep, doing graffiti. It seems like, they want to show, and they encapsulate their ideology through this graffiti, and they keep going. That's amazing, yeah. But this is just my point of view.
Thank you. So we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I think we have time to take one more question from the audience. And this one is for Adnan Almohamad. And so do you think that it would have been possible for ISIS to open the door for looting antiquities had it not been for international complicity that facilitated the looting and smuggling of antiquities?
يعني تصريح بمعنى آخر. Actually, this is a good question, but this international complicity may not have been direct, but it appears in the international community as a whole letting down or giving up on the Syrian people as a whole. So the Syrian people were slaughtered by many parties, and the international community did not intervene to stop that slaughter. And in that sense, there was complicity by the international community, but I would not say there was a direct involvement by the international states in supporting ISIS in this looting. We don't have, despite all the reports, we don't have solid evidence to that effect. But what we know for a fact is that half the Syrian population has been displaced, and the international community has given up on the Syrian people for 10 years now. So I would like to thank Mr. Hassan for his presentation with regards to the graffiti, because we face this problem of graffiti in archaeological sites. Even in Idlib, we know that people, there is a person who has written his love story or a symbol of his love and loved one in archaeological sites, and we found the same print and the same graffiti in so many walls, and we wanted to look for that person who was all over the place in many places doing graffiti with his love story in many archaeological sites and elsewhere.
How nice that we can end with a love story, I think, in all of this. Thank you, Adnan, for that answer, which I think really points really well the failure of international community and many others to Syrian cultural heritage was also the failure to Syrians on a much broader scale. Thank you all for your presentations tonight. I want to also thank the translators who have been absolutely indefatigable. I know Asma Shahada now has an honorary PhD in archaeology for me. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all to the audience who we haven't seen. Kristen, what am I forgetting to say or do now?
I thank you to Cara for supporting these projects and for allowing us to have this venue to be able to these academics to share this research. And then just thank you again to our speakers. And we just really appreciate you doing this. And like I said, it's a wonderful way to get your research out there. So thank you very much.